On February 20th, 2026, Donald Trump lost his most powerful economic weapon. Not to China, not to Europe, not to any foreign government, to 6 members of his own Supreme Court, 3 of them appointed by Trump himself. In a single ruling, the court struck down the most aggressive tariff regime in American history. Tariffs that had collected over $160 billion from American businesses. Tariffs that had reshaped global supply chains. Tariffs that had defined Trump's entire economic identity. Gone. In one morning. Declared unconstitutional. In one morning, $160 billion in Trump tariffs were declared unconstitutional. And within hours, Trump was already trying to rebuild them using completely different legal tools. The trade war isn't over. It just changed shape entirely. To understand why this ruling matters so much, you need to understand what Trump was actually doing with IEPA. IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, is a 1977 law designed for genuine national emergencies, freezing foreign assets, blocking financial transactions, responding to immediate threats to national security. Trump used it to do something no president had ever done before. He used it to impose sweeping tariffs on imports from virtually every country on Earth. On Liberation Day in April 2025, Trump announces tariffs of at least 10% on imports from almost all U.S. trading partners. Some countries face rates above 30%. China faces a combined rate of 35%. The legal justification is IEPA. The state of emergency is the U.S. trade deficit. American businesses immediately challenged the tariffs in court. Small manufacturers, import companies, state governments, all arguing the same thing. IEPA was never designed for this. The courts agree. First, the Court of International Trade in May 2025. Then the Court of Appeals in August 2025. Then, on February 20th, 2026, the Supreme Court, 6-3. Sponsor block here, but here's what the headlines missed entirely. The ruling doesn't end Trump's trade war. It forces Trump to fight it with weapons that are slower, weaker, and legally far more complicated. And the scramble to rebuild the tariff wall is already creating a new kind of economic chaos that nobody is fully pricing in yet. When the Supreme Court strikes down a law, it doesn't just stop future damage. It raises an immediate question about the past. Over $160 billion in IEPA tariffs were collected between early 2025 and February 24th, 2026. Tax Foundation, 2026. That money came from American businesses. Importers who had no choice but to pay or stop bringing goods into the country. The Supreme Court ruling means those tariffs were illegal, which means the businesses that paid them may be entitled to get that money back. More than 1,000 companies had already filed for refunds before the ruling was even announced. That number is expected to multiply dramatically. Ropes and Gray, February 2026. But here is the problem nobody wants to say out loud. The government already spent that money. It went into the federal budget. It funded government operations for an entire year. Refunding $160 billion would add directly to a deficit already running at over $36 trillion in accumulated debt. The Supreme Court explicitly declined to address the refund question. It sent that problem back to the lower courts, which means hundreds of American businesses are now waiting in legal limbo for money they legally overpaid to a government that cannot easily give it back. Within hours of the ruling, Trump is already working around it. He imposes a new 10% global tariff under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, effective February 24th, 2026. Section 122 is different from IEPA in one critical way. It has been tested in court before. It is explicitly designed to allow tariffs, and the Supreme Court's ruling does not touch it. But Section 122 has 2 major limitations that IEPA did not have. First, Section 122 tariffs are capped at 15%. Under IEPA, Trump imposed rates above 30% on some countries. That ceiling is now gone. Second, Section 122 tariffs expire after 150 days. They are not permanent. They are a temporary bridge while Trump builds something else. That something else is Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. Trump launches new Section 301 investigations against China, Mexico, the European Union, and more than a dozen other economies simultaneously. CNBC, March 2026. Section 301 investigations take months to complete, but the tariffs they produce are not capped and not time-limited. Treasury Secretary Bessent says the goal is explicit. The administration expects tariff revenue in 2026 to remain virtually unchanged from IEPA levels. CNBC, February 2026. The trade war didn't end on February 20th. It entered a 150-day reconstruction phase. If you read only the headlines, you might think the ruling brought relief to global trade. The headlines are wrong. In the immediate aftermath of the ruling, markets react with confusion rather than relief. The dollar weakens slightly, then recovers. Chinese stocks rise, then give back gains. Gold holds near record highs above $5,500 per ounce. This is not the behavior of markets that believe the trade war is over. This is the behavior of markets that don't know what the rules are anymore. American companies that had already restructured supply chains to avoid IEPA tariffs now face a new set of questions. Do the new Section 122 tariffs apply to the same goods? Will Section 301 rates be higher or lower than IEPA rates? Should they keep relocating production or wait for clarity? A company making a $50 million factory investment cannot make that decision in a legal environment that changes every 150 days. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York estimates that tariff uncertainty alone reduces business investment by approximately 1% of GDP annually. Federal Reserve Bank of New York, 2025. That is not the cost of tariffs. That is the cost of not knowing what the tariffs will be. And that cost is now higher than it has ever been. But here is the part that every finance minister outside Washington is losing sleep over. The Supreme Court didn't just change American trade policy. It exposed something much more dangerous underneath it. The obvious winner of the Supreme Court ruling is China, but the real winners are less obvious. The companies that brought this case to the Supreme Court were not large corporations with armies of lawyers. They were small businesses. Learning Resources, an educational toy company from Illinois. VUS Selections, a wine importer from New York. Companies paying tariffs that threatened to put them out of business. Companies that had no political influence, no trade lobbyists, no direct line to the White House. They won because the Constitution was on their side. The power to impose taxes belongs to Congress, not to the president, not to any emergency declaration. This matters beyond trade policy. It is the most significant check on executive economic power in a generation. SCOTU's blog, February 2026. The obvious loser is Trump's trade strategy, but the deeper loss is harder to quantify. During the IEPA period, the Trump administration negotiated trade frameworks with multiple countries. They used the threat of tariffs as leverage. Buy more American goods or face higher rates. Restrict Chinese technology or face economic consequences. Align with Washington or pay the price. Those negotiations produced real commitments. Countries agreed to buy American soybeans, aircraft, energy. Some restricted Chinese technology investment. Now, those countries are watching Washington carefully. If the tariff threat can be struck down by 6 judges, how credible is American economic leverage going forward? The European Union has already paused ratification of its framework agreement with the United States. Holland and Knight, March 2026. Not because they oppose the deal, because they're no longer certain the deal will hold. American credibility as a trading partner took a hit that no executive order can repair quickly. The countries suffering most from this ruling are the ones that had just finished adapting to IEPA. Vietnam restructured its entire export economy to capture manufacturing leaving China under IEPA tariffs. New factories, new supply chains, new workers trained for new jobs. Vietnam alone attracted over $36 billion in foreign investment in 2025, most of it bet on IEPA tariffs staying in place. Vietnam Ministry of Planning, 2025, Mexico absorbed billions in new investment from American companies relocating production to avoid Chinese tariff exposure. India positioned itself as the alternative technology supply chain that Washington wanted and Beijing feared. Now those countries face a 150-day window of uncertainty before Section 301 tariffs potentially reimpose a completely different tariff structure. The factories are built, the workers are hired, the investments are made, but the rules they were built around no longer exist in the same form, and the new rules won't be finalized for months. Here is the uncomfortable truth about this ruling. The Supreme Court decision was designed to restore order, to return tariff authority to Congress where it constitutionally belongs, to end the era of one man reshaping global trade with a single signature. It has done the opposite. Congress has not passed major trade legislation in decades. It is deeply divided on tariff policy. Republicans want protection. Democrats want multilateralism. Neither side can muster a majority for comprehensive trade reform. So the constitutional home of tariff authority, the institution that is supposed to set trade policy, is functionally paralyzed on the issue. Meanwhile, Trump is rebuilding his tariff structure using Section 122, Section 232, and Section 301 simultaneously. The result is not less uncertainty. It is more uncertainty, spread across more legal frameworks, more timelines, and more potential court challenges. The ruling was supposed to simplify American trade policy. It has made it more complex than at any point in modern history. Every importer, every exporter, every supply chain manager, every finance minister watching from abroad, none of them know what the rules will be in 150 days. So where does this actually end? The Supreme Court has spoken. Congress is paralyzed. Trump is rebuilding through alternative legal channels. And the global economy is absorbing uncertainty at a cost measured in billions every quarter. Here is what nobody in Washington is saying publicly, but what every serious economist is modeling privately. The next 150 days will determine whether the United States emerges from this with a coherent trade policy or enters a new phase of economic instability that makes the IEPA era look orderly by comparison. Stay with me, because the three scenarios for what comes next are more consequential than anything that has happened so far. So here's where we actually are right now. A 150-day window, three possible outcomes, and a global economy holding its breath. The 150-day clock started February 24th, 2026. It expires around mid-July 2026. What happens before that deadline will determine the shape of American trade policy for the rest of this decade. There are three realistic outcomes. Each one produces a completely different global economy. Scenario 1. The congressional fix. The most constitutionally correct outcome. The least politically likely. Congress passes new trade legislation that explicitly grants the president tariff authority with defined limits on rates, duration, and scope. This would resolve the legal uncertainty permanently. It would give American trade policy a stable foundation that no court can strike down. But it requires bipartisan agreement in a Congress that has not passed major trade legislation in 30 years. Republicans want high tariffs on China. Democrats want multilateral trade frameworks and labor protections. Neither side trusts the other to write the legislation. If this scenario happens, markets stabilize. Global supply chains get the certainty they need to invest. The dollar strengthens on renewed confidence in American institutions. Probability, low. Timeline, impossible before the 150-day deadline. Scenario 2. Trump wins through Section 301, the most likely outcome, and the most disruptive for global trade. Section 301 investigations conclude. The administration imposes new tariffs on China and others at rates comparable to or higher than IEPA levels. Treasury Secretary Bessent has already said this is the goal. Tariff revenue in 2026 virtually unchanged from IEPA levels. CNBC, February 2026. If this happens, the trade war continues at full intensity, but now on legal foundations that are harder to challenge in court. Section 301 has been used successfully for decades. Its authority is well established. Trump used it during his first term without a Supreme Court challenge. For China, this is the worst scenario. IEEPA tariffs were legally vulnerable. Section 301 tariffs are not. For American businesses, this means the restructuring costs they already absorbed were not the end of the adjustment. They were just the beginning. Probability high. Timeline. Section 301 investigations complete by August 2026. Scenario 3. Legal chaos. The least discussed but most dangerous outcome. Section 122 tariffs face immediate legal challenges. Courts rule that the balance of payments justification does not meet the statutory threshold. Section 301 investigations are challenged as predetermined. Bessent already said publicly the outcome will reproduce IEEPA tariff levels. That statement could be used in court against the administration. If both Section 122 and Section 301 tariffs face injunctions, the United States briefly has no major tariff regime in place. American import costs fall overnight. A flood of cheap goods enters the market. Domestic manufacturers face competition they cannot survive without protection. The political response would be immediate and extreme. Emergency legislation, executive orders, constitutional confrontation. This scenario does not resolve quietly. It escalates into a constitutional crisis about who actually controls American economic policy. Probability, lower than Scenario 2, but higher than 0. And the consequences of it happening would reach every economy on Earth within weeks. You do not need to follow every legal filing to understand where this is heading. Watch 3 indicators over the next 150 days. First, the Section 301 investigation timeline. If investigations conclude quickly, Scenario 2 is playing out. If they slow down or face legal challenges, watch for Scenario 3. Second, congressional trade legislation. If bipartisan talks begin, Scenario 1 becomes possible. If Congress stays silent, it isn't. Third, the U.S. dollar index. A strengthening dollar signals market confidence in American trade policy stability. A weakening dollar signals the opposite. These 3 indicators will tell you more than any press conference or political statement. Because the markets are pricing in the real outcome while Washington is still arguing about the legal framework. The Supreme Court ruling on February 20th, 2026 was not the end of Trump's trade war. It was a forced reset, a moment when the legal architecture that held the entire strategy together was declared unconstitutional by 6 justices. 3 of those justices were appointed by Trump himself, which tells you something important about how far the executive branch had pushed the boundaries of its own authority. The trade war continues. The tools are different. The timeline is compressed. The legal foundation is shakier than the administration admits. And in the middle of all of it, American businesses that still don't know what their import costs will be in 6 months. Trading partners that don't know what the rules will be. And a global economy absorbing uncertainty at a cost that compounds every quarter it continues. The Supreme Court gave Congress the power back. Congress doesn't know what to do with it. And the president is already rebuilding through the back door. The real lesson of February 20th, 2026 is not about tariffs or IEEPA or constitutional law. It is about what happens when the world's largest economy cannot agree on its own basic rules. Because when America doesn't know its own trade policy, neither does anyone else. If you want to understand the economics behind the headlines, subscribe to the Econaut. The link is below.